The circle, yes. All right, good afternoon at this event on driving societal change through inclusive STEM research. My name is Cynthia Liem. I'm an associate professor at TU Delft. I'm also the acting chief diversity officer at the moment. I was not supposed to be the moderator. It was supposed to be a colleague of mine, Dr. Claudia Werk. She is at TPM, an associate professor. There she has been vouching for more inclusive research and innovation. That's her research topic as well. And she's been trying to set up a community of like-minded people in TU Delft to work on this. I see some of you nodding, so you might have been invited to other events first. It happens to be the EDI week this week, so we do try to pay attention to EDI topics. And then Claudia said, I really want an inclusive research event also as part of this week. So that became this event together with Studium Generale here in the library. Unfortunately, things are going around, so Claudia turned out ill, and then she indicated she couldn't make it. Well, and then I decided to step in instead. So last-minute moderator, but we'll make the best of it. And luckily also in my own work, I work on responsible AI. These questions of inclusivity are actually very prevalent. Also now I have the microphone anyway. Later on, I'll also tell you a little bit of what the Diversity Office now hopes to do on this end in the coming time. So that's coming in. Before that, though, what we're going to do today is we have two expert talks by two invited guests, whom I will introduce. They'll talk about their work. We can ask questions to them about that work. After that, we will have something that will look like what we call that fishbowl format. So we'll close the circle out here, basically, with some open spaces. We'll have our experts in there, but we are going to have a conversation about how to do better at doing inclusive research, where the idea is that the empty seats will be taken also by some of you in this audience, so we can have the conversation together. So that's happening later, but first we are going to hear about the work of our colleagues who we invited out here. And the first one I have the pleasure to introduce is Professor Hanneke Takkenberg, who is Professor of Clinical Decision-Making in Cardiothoracic Interventions at Erasmus MC. She is a Professor of Management Education, co-executive director of the Erasmus Center of Women and Organizations. And she will talk about her work out here in the medical space. Hanneke, please.
Oh yeah. Thank you for the kind introduction, and happy to be here again. I was here last year as well. And I'm asked to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is actually differences between men and women when it comes to thoracic aortic aneurysm. And my research in this area basically started with a very bad joke. I've been doing research in cardiothoracic surgery forever, I think. And I've been involved in the Erasmus MC, in the Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery, for many, many years. And never thought that there would be differences between men and women. And that's interesting, actually. It was a blind spot for me, because I was the first woman in that Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery as a staff member, and have been the single female in that department for a long, long time. But now times are becoming more, diverse also for cardiothoracic surgery, and no less than 17% of our cardiothoracic surgeons are women, which is quite a lot because it was hardly any. Anyway, so I've been doing a lot of research into thoracic aortic aneurysm. And at one point in time when there was more attention, Oh, I'll tell you all about it. Cardio is heart, thoracic is basically anything that's in your chest. So your lungs and some other organs as well. And we do surgery, so we open up patients, take out either cancer, or we replace parts of your heart or your entire heart. And this happens in people aged 0 to very advanced age. One of the diseases that we treat is thoracic aortic aneurysm. And your aorta is the main artery that emerges from your heart. It's a very important artery because basically it supplies your whole body with sufficient oxygen to function. So when your aorta dilates, becomes bigger, that's not a good thing, because that means that the bigger your aorta gets, the more you are at risk of having either a tear or a total rupture of your aorta. So basically you are walking with a ticking time bomb. And over the past 30 years in our department, we have been operating patients with thoracic aortic aneurysm to prevent the tearing of their aorta and put in prosthetic material. That's what we do. We replace the dilated aorta and put in a prosthesis, and then these people continue to live their lives. So very important to do that, to prevent disaster and sudden, almost immediate death. But we never thought there would be differences between men and women, and any of the studies that I've done in this field have always been aggregating men and women. Up until the time that I looked in our database of all the surgeries that had been done in these patients, and I separated the men and the women who underwent these surgeries. The timing of this operation is optimal at a dilation of about 5 centimeters of your aorta. Then you need to operate. So my hypothesis was that women actually would probably be operated at a slightly smaller diameter than men, because women are not as tall as men, have a smaller body surface area. And so you would think perhaps they would be operated a little bit earlier. And what I found in our database was the opposite. Men were operated on average at 5 centimeters of dilation, and women at 5.5 centimeters. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Why would that be? And so I was thinking of all these biological solutions, biological explanations, having to do perhaps with hormones, having to do with the fact that women are protected by their hormones, and then after menopause perhaps only then would start to have aneurysms. But then I thought perhaps I should also ask one of our surgeons. So I went to Jos, and this is usually how I see Jos. He's always busy trying to replace aortas, and he's really the surgeon that's into aortic surgery. And so I meet him in the hallway, and I'm like, Jos, this is what I found. What's going on? And he says, oh, Hanneke, I know what's going on. You know, these women, whenever I see them in the outpatient clinic before surgery, they're always hesitating, and they want to think it over. And I think that's why they are operated at 5.5 centimeters. Basically, I'm like, well, that's a very bad joke, Jos. But we laughed about it. And I said, well, I think size matters, and I think we should look into this. So I went to another colleague of mine in the Department of Cardiology, and I said, well, Jolien, we should do something about this, but because our surgeons are making jokes about women that are being treated too late in a disease process. So we started out of fun. We said we were going to start a project, and we call it Size Matters, which is somewhat of a bad joke by itself. But then we started inviting our friends who also do research, and also some patients who are involved in research. And they're all like, I'm not sure what this project will be about, but we love the title, so we all join. And so it started with a joke and became something really serious. And then ZonMW said, okay, let's fund this. And so for 4 years, we've been doing research into this. To give you a bit more background, this is what thoracic aortic aneurysm looks like. This is where the main problem usually is, in the beginning of the aorta. 200 adults estimated in the Netherlands, so that's a lot of people who are walking around with the feeling, I have a ticking time bomb. I don't want to raise my blood pressure because it may tear. It's really a big issue also on their quality of life. It causes 600 deaths each year, estimated, because not all people we can see what their cause of death has been. If there's no autopsy, we cannot see. So it's a big problem. So that was basically what we wanted to do. And very briefly, let me tell you, we asked a couple of questions. First of all, we asked the question, do women present differently? We never thought about that, and they do. Women are at least 8 years older on average than men when they present. They also present more often with a lot more symptoms. So they often have a high blood pressure, more than men. They often have an extremely low blood pressure. That means that actually they've been diagnosed too late and they require urgent surgery because there's a tear in their aorta. They more often have diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and also very interestingly, we did not know that this was a sign of having a thoracic aortic aneurysm. Nausea is very common in women and hardly seen in men. But since all the guidelines for diagnosis and treatment are based mainly on males, because it's a bit more common in males or a bit more detected in males, we never realized that all those women that would come in with symptoms of nausea would be sent home and saying, oh yeah, it's probably something psychological because it's hard to detect. Also, another thing that we found out, that if you looked at aneurysm growth over time, and this is a bit more technical, but I think it's very important, we usually only measure at 1 point in the aorta, but we decided to measure now at 2 points in the aorta, and we found out that women actually more often have an aneurysm in the lower part, in what we call in the higher part, what we call the tubular part of the aorta, while men have more often an aneurysm in the sinus, which is closer to the valves. And that was something nobody knew. And what you can see here, that when you look, these are patterns of growth over time for men versus women. You see that both lines are going up, and these are 50-year-old patients. You see here that men have a much bigger diameter in the sinus, and it grows slowly over time. But well, for the tubular part, actually women already at the age of 50 seem to be having a somewhat bigger size of their aorta than men, and it also tends to grow a little bit faster. Then if you take another look at patients who are 70 years on average, what you then see is, well, a mild pattern of growth over time for the sinus part, and you see for the ascending diameter, you see women present with a much bigger diameter, and also their growth is faster than in men. And that was compelling. And that also means that right now, through this insight, we know that we have to look at different locations for men and women to truly see where the aneurysm is, and that also predicts the growth pattern. Very important insight. Another question that we asked, so do women have different treatment and do they have different outcomes? Well, what we found is that they have surgery sooner after diagnosis than men, probably because they're being diagnosed too late. And also, what we see is that the surgery that they need is way more complex than the surgery that men need. Also has to do with the fact that they are diagnosed later in the disease process. On the positive side, the outcomes between men and women when it comes to clinical outcomes, complications, death, there is no difference between men and women. Then finally, we also asked the question, do women cope differently with their disease? And well, we do know that women cope differently than men with anything in life. So also here we found differences, and we found that women had a far lower health-related quality of life compared to men. Again, their disease is worse, has not been recognized as fast as for men, but also, of course, the impact of a ticking time bomb is different on women than it is on men. They also had more anxiety and depression and different coping strategies, but we know that, you know, men tend to put their head into the ground and not the ostrich approach, as we call it, and women like to talk about it more. Gives all kinds of clue on how you can also psychologically support patients, both women and men, better when they have this disease. So that's what we found. And going back then to Jos, because right now we're currently test implementing a patient information portal that's gender sensitive, sex and gender sensitive, I should say. And we're also going to open that up once we have proven it is effective and not causing any more stress. You know, that's the other thing you can do when you inform. Coming back to Jos, I want to briefly talk about the fact that Jos, of course, was immediately thinking of gender, while I was thinking of sex when it comes to underlying reasons why there are differences in this disease and in the perception of this disease. And that also had to do, and I think this is a very important one, because I think my story is only an illustration about how vast differences can be between men and women, but they're caused not only by biology. We're still looking into the more sex differences when it comes to hormones and investigating tissue, looking at biological differences. But it also has to do with the role that men and women play in society that's different. It has to do with our identity, with the relationships that we build, but also with the organizations that we have been building over time. And I think this picture is most important when I think of inclusive research, whether it's technological research, whether it's social innovation research. We need to take this into consideration. I am one of many people in the Erasmus MC who's actually focusing on looking into differences between men and women. And I think it was in June of last year that we came together, all 60 of us back then, to start thinking about a Women's Health Research and Innovation Center. And we've opened that on March 7th of this year. So now this research is being connected to all kinds of other research going on in the Erasmus MC. And we're trying to create not only multi, but also inter- and transdisciplinary initiatives to improve women's health. Because although women live longer than men, they live 25% of their time in a very bad health. And this is not at the end of their lives, but it's mainly also in the productive phase of their life. It's not only costing these women a lot of opportunities and, of course, the loss of health, but it's also costing our society and economy a lot. And that's why we put together this center, which we opened, and I'll show you briefly. This is us during the opening. Maybe you saw it in the newspapers or on the radio. There's been a lot of noise around this center, and we're still going viral, I should tell you. What we're doing, and this is also, I think, interesting to take a look at, we are taking a holistic approach of health. We no longer silo the different organs in a person, in this case, a woman. But we're trying to take an approach that not only looks at what we call women-specific conditions. In Rotterdam, we call that the bikini view, you know. We also look at conditions that affect women differently than men, or that are under-recognized in women. And you can think of heart disease, but you can also think of migraine, which is way more common in women and also connected to hormones. But since people were not working together, we had a hard time making progress. And that's what changed with this center. We focus on women's health across all life stages, but with a specific focus on productive life, because there's a lot to gain. And you can also prevent a lot of bad health later on in the later stages of life. Finally, and I think very important, we try to bridge data and methodological gaps on women's health. For example, in my hospital, at the general anesthesia department, they have no way of registering in our EPD, in our electronic patient data records, for example, whether you have your period when you undergo surgery. Well, blood loss is a big thing, you know, in surgery. And when you have your period and you undergo surgery, women have more bleedings. It's simple as that. But we're not registering it. And if you don't register it, it's also not going to end up in the European data space area. And then artificial intelligence is not going to make use of that data. And that's very dangerous for women. So that's also something that we want to communicate here. So if you want to have more information, because I'm going to stop now, this is who we are. If you're interested, email us or find us on our website. Sign up to our newsletter. And if you want to join our community and volunteer, and right now there's a lot of people who've already said we need to make movement, please know that you're welcome, because we do need everybody. And you don't need any medical knowledge for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Before you go sit, I did want to check if anyone in the audience has a question coming from this presentation. There will be more discussion time later, so if not, I could leave it. But if someone has a burning question, I have some space for that. Not yet? Then we do that later, because then I would prefer to go on and have most discussion in the form of the conversation later. Then I will announce the next speaker, Professor David Abbink, who is Professor of Haptic Human-Robot Interaction at TU Delft. David has really been profiling as our transdisciplinary person. He will surely speak of it in the presentation. He's been the lead shaping the future of work with transdisciplinary research and innovation in the field of robotics in a center called FRAME. And also thanks to that, but I think to many more merits, he was recipient of actually the highest Dutch acknowledgement of science with societal impact, which is called the Stevin-premie, and he received it in 2024. David, please tell us about your work.
Thanks a lot, Cynthia. So indeed, you guessed correctly. I'd like to say something of the work we're doing with a large group of people to shape the future of physical work. I'll explain a bit why that's needed and why that has something to do with inclusivity and why I think we try and take that close to our heart when we do our work. So I would say including the voices of people who do the actual physical work is not done enough. It's actually quite rare. And well, what transdisciplinarity means, I'll try and explain, and how difficult it is to go from nice aspirations that it's hard to disagree with, to practice, to just doing it. So that's my story in a nutshell. Now you can doze off or listen for 15 minutes. So why physical work? We think it's really important for key sectors that keep our society running. So health is a very important one. And we often think of innovating with surgeons, for example, but about 80% of healthcare professionals are actually the nurses. And innovation with and for nurses happens much less. The same for energy transition, or cleaning, or construction, or the physical work in the baggage halls. It's the kind of work that we like to say, it's maybe heavy, maybe there's not enough people doing it, it's going to be worse. David, can't you make a robot? And maybe 10 years ago, I would have said, yeah, sure, give me some money and we'll appoint a PhD. And then, and if no real solution comes out, well, that's not my responsibility, because listen, you know, I'm a roboticist. I don't know nothing about whatever, you know, work context you are in, and it's too complicated, the world. So I do my bit, and if other people do their bit, then we're fine, right? So I became a bit disenchanted with that stance I had, and tried to say, well, maybe it's important to take a little bit more responsibility and and kind of organize collective responsibility to do things different. So this is the economic argument. So if you want to do this work, then you need to answer many kind of arguments. Why would we want to do this? The economic argument is, well, we have stagnating productivity. So that's bad for our competition, and there's labor shortages, and it happens at SMEs and large companies. And so what should we do? And what we hear a lot is, look to America. That's where things are going really well. Right now, maybe also what we should do is kind of revalue pragmatic education, practical education, so MBO, because not enough people are doing that. And maybe we need to find a way to fix innovation. So let's start by investing. Oh, no, wait, no, that's a different story. But so then a very often heard example is look to the States or look to Asia, yeah, and there's AI and robotics, and they're going to solve everything. And if there's one thing I learned in my education here at TU Delft is that technology will solve everything. Yeah, that's how I was brainwashed. And then we look at, for example, Amazon. And in Amazon, technology is neutral, by the way, right? That's also what I learned. So in Amazon, there's a huge growth in labor productivity. So this is amazing. And Jeff Bezos can shoot himself to space and then thank the workers who made this possible. But yeah, unfortunately, the work that happens with the nice, safe robots that me and my colleagues have made, of course, I haven't directly done that, but so our community of roboticists made the robots that made this possible, which is the terrible working conditions where productivity is maximized and where the people who are doing this physical work have to adapt themselves to kind of an old tailor-like maximized productivity. And that means if you want to go to the bathroom, it's going to cost you money. Yeah, so some people wear diapers. So how do you find that out? Sending out questionnaires? Nope, nobody answers them. Unions? Amazon stopped them. So what happens? Investigative journalists, ethnographers, they go into the field, they have conversations, they observe. That's how you find out. Years later. And then so there were big protests where the people at Amazon saying, we are not robots. So this is interesting. So whose responsibility is this? Well, certainly, I said, not mine. We never intended this. And Jeff Bezos says, well, you know, these robots are there, so if I don't use them, other people will use them. So, you know, it's the government who should do it. And the government says, yeah, listen, it's the hand of the market. So if there's market failure, then we do something, but otherwise, no. I can go on and on like this. This is the problem. It's called complex societal problems. We all know them. You know, it's the same with the climate crisis. It's everybody's problem, but it's nobody's responsibility. So future of work is a very similar kind of problem. So that means growth in labor productivity doesn't necessarily mean good quality work. And if you want to deliver good quality work, it's easy to say robots will offer all sorts of opportunities to reduce dull, dirty, and dangerous work. That's what roboticists say to each other, and that's what I write in my impact paragraph of my paper. It may contribute to da 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 da. But how that actually plays out, I don't know. Now, this is not a way to organize ourselves. Yeah. So we started to be interested with a large group of people how to actually do something about it. So we can complain, we can warn about the dangers, don't estimate too much of robotics. I don't know, over the last 2 decades, how many times I said that. Did all sorts of talks, and I'm not alone. Many roboticists do that, to try to paint a neutral picture and say, well, we should be geared towards. But then we say, actually, if you want to really change something, you need to do it in practice. And that means the first step is what we call minimum viable complexity. The whole world is too big. You'd be crazy to change the whole world. But if we stay in our lab, it's too small. So what's the amount of complexity that allows you to change something, to start a shift? So we made 2 choices. Choice 1, let's focus on physical work. I'll say a bit more about that. And choice 2 is let's focus not on the old school robots. That means that you need to standardize the whole work environment, but the new generation of robots, which is called cognitive robots. And they, through artificial intelligence, can deal with a little bit of variability, more than their cousins that require the whole world to pass by them like a conveyor belt. Obviously, you can see some of my background and network in that. Yeah, so I'm a roboticist working in this kind of new robot. So that's also something where I felt I have some credibility and some knowledge and some network and some power. So how do I use that? Oh yeah, and then what we said with a large group of people, 35 scholars, more about that, is that what we want to do, and we thought very well, it's not a marketing tagline, we want to shape work with and for the people who do the work. And we want that work to be meaningful for people, not just safe, just, so it means at a more national level, you could say, or international level, and also economically viable. So if we take out one of these, we don't think it's going to be sustainable. And those values are a little bit at odds with each other, or can be at odds with each other. So figuring out the right space for contesting those values is going to be important. So physical work, just to clarify, is the kind of stuff you can't GPT your way out of. Maybe you know this picture, ChatGPT, finish this building. It's not going to happen. So we're going to need people to do that. And robots are not going to do it for us. And we have people already. We don't need humanoids. We have people. Let's take good care of those people and make sure the working conditions are right to do the work that actually is needed for the societal transitions that we face around climate, around energy, around care, etc. These are cognitive robots. Yeah, so examples, there's commercially available stuff that you can buy. There's stuff that we develop in our labs, which might be plausible to hit the reality in 5 years. So we're also really grounded in technology roadmaps, not just thinking, oh, drones or humanoids are going to solve everything. We're grounded in what we know is plausible. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we did with the organization called FRAME. So this houses 35 scholars from 5 different universities, Erasmus and Erasmus Medical Center being part of that as well. That unite engineers, designers, ethicists, work psychologists, organizational scholars, innovators, to really work together in these kind of sectors of physical work. Baggage handling, engine repair, nursing, construction, metal production. And so what we try to do is when organizations come to us and say, I'll make it a bit flat, David, make us a robot, I'll say, sure, sure. But maybe it's not going to be a robot that you need. And to figure out, I don't just need me and my roboticist friend, I need to bring all of my friends. And then together, we'll look what you really need. And it might be something different than a robot. And that's what we sell. And then people say, okay, so what kind of project do we need? They say, of course, 10 years. If you want to go through, analysis, understanding the building relations, go to prototyping, developing that, researching, implementing, scaling up, and checking the impact. We're not going to talk about 1 year. You need 10 years. And then people say, well, that's a bit ridiculous. We're not going to give you 10 years. What could you do for 1 year? And they say, for 1 year, we won't solve anything. All you get is trust. So this is our pragmatic way. All what will happen is that the people on the work floor and you will say, we shouldn't stop this. So this is a big bluff. Yeah, don't tell anybody. But that's what we hope, because it's the only way to start things to move. It's really hard contracting, because people want outcomes that are known upfront. What is the robot you will make? What is the problem? If you decide on that upfront, then we'll see if it's plausible. But we're saying, well, if you do that, then you're going to continue the same thing that you've done for the last couple of decades, and that got you into this situation. So if you really want to include the voices of the people who do the work, with all their creativity, who actually experience the work, who know much more about it than any of us, then you don't know what's going to come out of it. So this is called emergent ways of working. So when things emerge, you don't know up front. So this is a nightmare to contract, because everybody in contracts want to minimize risks. So we spent, I don't know, 9 months, a year, in a contracting phase, which is all about trust. And then we get to do a pilot. And then after that pilot, people say, oh, It's great. We shouldn't stop. Let's find the funds for 5 years. And we go into another contracting period. It takes a year, or 1.5 years. Like, it's terrible. But it's very meaningful work. So this is not a success story. It's a kind of reality that I'd like to share with you. So how much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Yes, yes, yes. So how do we shape work processes in an organization? So this is what I try to explain. You go from innovations and ideas and prototypes. That's typically when the engineers come in. Yeah, and then we have and designers, and then we have implementation and adoption, human factors and designers. These people don't talk to each other, we just hand off. And 90% of innovations die here. We didn't see that coming. And we contracted so nicely what the output should be. And then all these stupid workers, they don't use the millions euros innovation that we gave them. Baggage handling, 2 decades of failed innovation. Erasmus MC, the hospital is full of unused robots. Yes? Any organization has a cellar, a basement of a graveyard of robots and mechanized systems. We don't like to talk about that, but that would be a good photography assignment for. Anyways. So what we try to do is say, and then let's suppose the innovation actually gets to be scaled up and used in an organization, then who studies the impact on that work? So this is the story of Amazon. So, well, the innovators, they care about this part, because then it's successful. Yeah, but what it does to the work and the people who actually make things happen with all sorts of workarounds, you know, the worker and the organization should adapt to whatever it is that's being done here and paid for. So that's the wrong way. So many people say what we need to include is the social science expertise, include that upfront in innovation. Beautiful reports have been written about it. It's really hard to go from those reports, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and we all do, to put that in practice. And so this is an example of how we try to put that in practice. So what we say is we need to put the phenomena central. The phenomena means what we can all see and agree on. And then we need to take the engineers, the psychologists, the organizational scholars who do more qualitative work, the designers, and bring them together with the workers and experience the work. So we have to do it, we have to see it, we have to get to know these people. That's a very social science or ethnographic approach. You need to immerse yourself in the context before you do anything. I don't know how to do that. I only see forces and positions. So that means I need to learn something. But I'm a professor, doctor, ingenieur, Stevin laureate. Why do I need to learn something? Leave me in my expertise. That's where I'm good at. If you want the best out of me, let me do what I can do best. That doesn't work in transdisciplinary research and innovation. So it's hard, it's slow, it's confrontational. I like talking, as you know by now. How do I learn how to listen? It's hard work for me. So I progressed. Not there yet. Anyway, so that's what we put central, these worker-robot relations. These things learn, workers learn, organizations learn. If you want to predict that, it's a mess. That's why we can't. So that's why you have to work in an emergent way. And so our question is, if this is what we want to move towards, what's actually needed in terms of observations? What's actually needed in terms of interventions? This is what we try to figure out. Hard work. So then, should I be able to do this? No. Sorry, not smart enough. So we have to be Leonardo da Vinci somehow together. And this is the parable of, the blind man touching the elephant. Everybody thinks it's something different, and if only you could communicate to each other, you'd be able to spot the elephant in the room. And so that's why we include very different perspectives on exactly the same phenomena, so that we can take off our blindfolds and expose collective blind spots. Difficult diagram, skip it. This is how it feels like. So it feels like being tied to the hip to people whose expertise you don't know, and you have to learn, while a deadline of 1 year, where there's really huge stakes, is coming towards you. That does something to the people who do the work, including us. So it's not all roses. So then very last 2 slides. So what does that look like? Example of outcomes. This is us working with KLM engine repair people. They do very heavy physical work to file the fan blades. And there's many of these in a jet engine. Not enough workers to do that, really skilled labor. Can't you make a robot? Way too complicated. Even if a robot could do it, which they can't, I'll tell you, if you remove this part in the organization, all the implicit knowledge moves out of the other elements of work that happen in the organization. So you need actually to train people here. Anyways, so don't replace it. So we immerse ourselves in the work. Then this is Jairo. So Jairo said, he's one of the experts. He can work maybe 10% because of bursitis, so his shoulder is pretty much ruined after all that work. But he's brilliant. He can do it in 3 strokes, done. And we mess around and we have to measure, but he knows the material. And when we ask him, how do you do it? He says, I just know it. I can't explain it to you, I just do it. And we asked him, do you want a robot? No. And he's not scared a robot will take his job. He thinks the things are useless. He's seen enough of them. And what he wants, he's tried to explain, is with a broom, he wants something that explains how he does this. So this is his visualization of how he does the work. And he says, I need a kind of guide that can help me guide around. Now, he explained this the very first time when we came with a robot on the work floor. We want to show our robot. He told it to us. A year later, he told it to us again. That was the first time we heard it. And I thought, Jairo, why didn't you tell us the first time? I said, I told you. Well, we couldn't listen because we were too happy showing our robot. And we found the notes and like, shit. We even made notes of it. And it didn't go through. So this shows something about how difficult it is. So it's nice, including the voices of the workers, but it's more than just going and say, hey, what do you want this? And then go away into our labs. It's really hard work. Relational work, reflective work. Anyways, what we then did was make the thing he had in his mind. So this is not robotics. It's not interesting to publish on. No, nobody gets Stevin premies for this kind of work. Yeah? But this made sure that we understood the work process well enough, and it gained his trust. He said, I've asked the organization for 10 years to make this for me. Thanks. And actually, now I see the limitation. Now I can feel the limitation, and I could kind of see the value of putting this thing and program it into a robot, because then I can be a little bit more flexible with different blades. And something very different came out than what we brought to the table the first time. So this is the benefit after 3 years, where also we could have said straight away, why didn't we think of this? It's not that difficult. Once we're here, we could say why we needed to make it like this. But we needed to go through this entire loop. So that's the hard work. And then I wanted to end with saying, that's what we do at one organization. Nice. Then we help KLM or the Erasmus MC. How does this scale up? And I want to say that we're also working on leveraging systems of change. And then we use techniques like the structured democratic dialogue. That means very rigorous processes by which voices of people who normally don't get to talk that much are included in brainstorming and decision making. And then we also use ways to get people to sign up to saying, hey, we all own a bit of this future of work. So ministries, organizations, labor unions. So if it's our collective problem, let's say it's our collective problem and take action from there. So that's my, my little story about how difficult it is. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, David. Is anyone now having any question in reaction to David's talk? Yes, we have one. Is this on? I'm not even sure if this is on. No, it seems to get on. Yeah.
Hey.
Just curious, how often does a company see through all the processes that you mentioned, or like how often do they drop out, like after 1 year or so?
So we haven't done that many organizations yet, and Schiphol is an example of an organization that said after the pilot, yes, we need the 5 years, and then took so far 18 months to decide whether or not they sign it. Still not signed. There's an example where it's not quite a dropout, but I wouldn't call it a resonating success. At least it's effing frustrating for us. Because we build relations with people that say, well, where are you guys? And we have to say, well, it's your management. That, Erasmus Medical Center, they, after a 3-month pilot, allowed us to work for a 2-year project. It's not 5 years. It's with postdocs. After 1 year, most postdocs say, let's look for something else. Need to think of my academic career. So if this team of 5 people that we appoint, 1 drops out, it's very hard. So it's good. And then the biggest step they made is say, well, we need to appoint fixed staff that can run these kind of projects. So there's real investment. It doesn't go in one go, poof, 10 years, but it goes. Those are the organizations. Then the rest were in pilot phase still. So working through 1-year projects. So we don't know if this is successful. This is just our attempt to, reel people in and also become good at this work, because also we need to learn a lot. And then in the meantime, we're also asking large subsidies for 10 years. So there's a gravitation grant, LTP. I'm writing one right now as we speak in the back of my mind. Deadline Tuesday. But so these are ways to kind of make sure that even if organizations don't have that long funding capacity or long vision, or the draagvlak, the kind of the power, the support to actually pull it through, that we find ways to finance it in a different way. And so we're going to ministries, and but this is 5 years of work, 2 years only doing it in practice, and still we're scraping by. Yeah, so. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I'm hooked. Yeah, and luckily not alone.
All right. Actually, I do want to ask if the circle could be built, and then we can have the dialogue together.
Yeah.
And while we do that, I'll secretly take some advertising space time. So thank you, David. There will be a chair also up for you in a bit. So first of all, I'm actually curious, who of you are students? PhDs, postdocs, assistant professors, associates, full professors. Those two. So we do have a bit of a mix of people, which is nice. So as said, I am an associate professor out here, but I'm also the chief diversity officer. And my task, I'm actually an acting chief diversity officer. We will have one for multiple years in the future. My job as an acting one was to think of a multi-year plan for the future of the university on the topic of equity, diversity and inclusion. Now, there are a lot of things a university can do in those fields. Like we should consider this in many facets of what the university does, from teaching to employee management to anything. So I am currently going through the decision-making phases there to establish a plan that acknowledges these different directions and hopefully helps those who care about this to find structure together or make that impact. So what we've been doing was to think of 5 structured target areas, as we call them: students, employees, research and innovation, education, and the campus. Because there are reasons to have dedicated policy for student well-being, for example, but at the same time also think in education of how the teachers, the students, the curriculum all interact. One of those pillars also is research and innovation. So also linking a little bit to what was said just now, I just wanted to share with you what we've been thinking of here, that what we want to do within research and innovation is to call for more attention to EDI in preparation of research, in the research itself, but also in how we deal with impact. And the ways we've been doing that was actually to look at how these bigger subsidy schemes ask for you to prove your impact, and you have to typically build what they call an impact pathway. You have to think of where you want to be in the future, then of how your actions might contribute to that, but also have a bit of a mid-level layer of we should have these things in order to get there. I won't have the time to go through all of this, but I can at least mention to you the different outcomes we've been thinking of under these different pathways, because they might inspire you also from your different positions to maybe see where you can also contribute or even demand more attention is being paid. So with regard to preparation, what we've been now asking for, what I'm now pleading with the deans, is to first of all have TU Delft sustaining a diverse research portfolio, because we have science, design, and engineering, and sometimes they look at each other in hierarchical ways. I see you nodding already. We've known intimately. But this is something where we can't only be an engineering or a design or a science place. We should also not only justify ourselves in those identities, and I do feel I see a lot of nodding here, also especially on the next generation of researchers. I see with my PhDs, they won't even be willing to do a PhD if I would box them into one of the places. So something seems to change there. We also want to celebrate acquisition inclusively. I did like you also nuancing the Stevin story. Like, we should celebrate that, but now the way we've been celebrating certain grants, the individual ones, it's completely off balance with doing the actual work and getting a worker to actually be very grateful for what you do. So there also we want to plead that the university does better policy there and not just if this grant, then news message, and otherwise we don't care. We want to facilitate inclusive perspectives by design, and on this it's nice that our Impact and Innovation Center already indicated interest in joining us here. They advise on grant applications and they want to help also researchers to think a bit more broadly on how can indeed the proposed research of mine be inclusive, have these perspectives, I think in the line of what David especially just has been presenting, but also facilitate the perspectives and needs of underrepresented groups. And that links a bit to what Hanneke also has been presenting, that maybe our populations of study, the typical ones we ask, historically we haven't always thought about it that thoroughly, or it was really difficult to broaden this, but we want to be able to broaden it more structuredly. And if INIC has a broader network of potential partners here, if we also exchange more across our different fields, we can probably win a lot there. Then on doing the research itself, we want to plead for diverse, inclusive, equitable, and psychologically safe teams. This links a bit to the discussion of social safety that we're having. Reality is we are in a very hierarchical institute on some of these matters. But how to then properly have your team, how to have the team also being diverse, we haven't really encouraged it very explicitly. We say some nice things about it, we don't check for it. Even there, actually, if your team gets more diverse, you actually get more friction too, because you all don't talk the same language. So even in this, probably that means we also should go a bit away from this productivity view, because you will be faster if you all talk the same language, right? So that's also one thing that we're now pleading for, like in assessment, maybe look at this also in the yearly assessments that leadership might have. Have the next generation be equipped? Again, I see in the younger generation especially that PhDs really want to make societal change. They want to be in the field. They don't really care so much anymore about the papers. And being in AI, I've already seen the flood of slop happening under Gen AI. I think the idea of a paper in some fields will break down soon, so we should think of other forms. But then also make sure we equip our people and think of, also with travel, I'm a computer scientist, we have conferences. Well, certain PhDs with certain passports will not be able to travel to certain countries. So maybe then we shouldn't as much invest in needing to be there with only the people who can get there, but think more broadly. Alignment to broader needs of society. It's often something we aspire, but we don't concretize it so much, so we want to encourage more actions towards that. Recognizing also the colleagues who are leaders on this, that they have this EDI leadership. We see many of these also starting their own circles, communities, fields, mentoring circles. So that's typically service you do out in your research community. But that's also something that often you're looked for when you have to talk about promotions. So we want for that to also be more something that we can be proud of. And then also have participants again being broad and representative, which also comes with some maybe extra training we might also need as researchers to properly connect, because we haven't always been, and we are often rather privileged in terms of our own backgrounds. And then finally on impact, we'd like for us, the community, the former community, our alumni also, to be inclusive role models in what they do, to make sure that research outcomes are visible and understood by a broad and diverse spectrum of stakeholders. Also here, I can imagine the fact that people tend to call for robots and AIs has to do a lot with the way that all the publicity around these topics has been historically, and that hasn't been very inclusive or realistic even. And then finally also that these research outcomes are useful, and that we also think more explicitly about usefulness. So the way we've now been doing success stories very often is indeed Professor X did fancy technology Y and published in fancy place Z. And we'd like to see if there could be more nuance to that. So that means communication should think of it, but leadership too, and anyone else. So I just wanted to share you some of these thoughts that we've been thinking of, that we want to explicitly put in our plan, where we hope the deans will say, oh yeah, that could be something we will not, at least not oppose, if possible even support. And then we will work with many other people to make this happen, because again, we see the energy and we hope we can do that. So that was a small ad space that I wanted to take, just so you know that we're doing this, and that maybe might also help some of you, given that you're members of the community interested in this topic. I would like to invite, well, thank you. I would like to invite Hanneke and David back in the circle here, and maybe even have an extra chair, because I need to sit too, because I want 2 empty chairs if possible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, wherever you want to sit. Let's maybe not have 2, well, it's fine. Let's just, yeah, maybe there, and then we have 2 empty chairs that are balanced in these. Okay. So, yes, thank you. I wanted to end with a plenary discussion on these themes. And actually, we wanted to do that with the fishbowl concept, as it's called. So there are 2 empty chairs here that actually are for you. Be welcome to go in here and sit and join the conversation, ask a question or give a reaction. If anyone, based on anything so far, already has something they want to bring up for this dialogue, be welcome to take the seat, and otherwise I will kick off. But I am already inviting you now, if you want to. There is space, and there will always be an extra empty space here that we can rotate on.
Well,
so
I actually,
anyway.
I
yes,
have
you want, yeah.
something to add, because in your presentation, David, you talked about the first year is building trust. And I very much recognize that. And of course, it does not fit with the speed and efficiency of our current system. Mm-hmm. Anything that I do starts with trust. And my question basically is, so how can we better embrace that?
Yes.
Currently in universities, I don't know about yours, but in my university and in the Erasmus MC, we say that we are collaborative, but we're actually quite competitive, and that's not a good thing for building trust. We're focused on the technology and not as much on the social innovation. I think there's a big imbalance there. So how, well, just a suggestion also for you making policy,
very good,
and perhaps
question.
also a question to everybody. So how we can we embrace that we do need time to change our attitude, perhaps? How can we make sure that this building of trust, which I think is an essential component moving forward for anything that will not only be fun to write down in a paper, but also have impact in some way in society or in hospitals or wherever? I think that's a big question to ask ourselves. So.
It is very, very good question. Yeah. And you want to make a statement, so please, yes. If possible, even go sit here. Although you are, of course,
I'm here.
In the circle, but
So yeah, trust is very important, and I think human connection comes from the need to make trust with others, because we are social beings, and our difference with other animals come from our ability to work together in large groups, and that is possible with trust. And so I want to share my view about it, to explore how trust can be built and how we can use the need for trust to make more inclusive communities. Before, in the past, the community was the survival mechanism of the humans. So you needed, everybody specialized in some area. You had a hunter, you had a builder, you had somebody foraging, and you needed each function in the community to be able to survive. And you needed to trust these people. So before, everybody specialized in something. Now, it's not, people do not have to make direct trust. You trust each other through institutions or religion or other things. like we trust each other and we are very civil with each other right now because there is some law protecting us, and we trust this law and we trust this institution which allows us to come here and speak with you, listen to you. But we don't necessarily need to connect with you as any individual. Somebody can come, listen, go, and there would be no need to trust you because the institution allows this in general, in people. So since now trust is built between people through institutions, the need for connection is still there, but is not used to build trust. So for example, maybe I can ask you, now in workspaces, yes, we did say that it's not, we're not gonna make a full transition to robotics, but workspaces are the communities of the people now mostly. And you need to make trust, because you need to trust your colleagues and work together with them. So you do make more connections in work. But as the possibility of, Jeff Bezos-like people, replacing, then the people where they build trust and they make connections is gonna get replaced. So how do you think that there will be a severe replacement in jobs, employment, in terms of employing people versus machines and computers? And if it is the latter, if there's more computation and machines that do the work, what do you think will be the community space for humans?
Thanks. If I understand your question correctly, it's kind of what would the impact be? Yeah, look at that. What would the impact be of increased automation, robotics, AI on people in the workplace? So I could give you an example. So in general, it's kind of hard to say, but in general, technology can bring people together and can also isolate people. So that's not a useful answer. One example is what we see at the baggage halls at Schiphol, where the workers used to work in pairs, 2, maybe 3. At some point they said, well, if they do it, then it's okay, but so they have a real social relation. They feel like a family. For example, the workers, they work in Schiphol, but they're employed by KLM, for example, or other baggage handlers, and they feel like a family. And that fabric is really strong. Now, at some point people said, well, you need to use lifting aids. If you don't use lifting aids, you'll ruin your back in 20 years. You don't feel it now, but you'll feel it in 20 years. You won't be able to lift your grandkids. So you have to use lifting aids. People said, when I have to use those lifting aids, they don't work. I work slower. So I won't use them. So I'll still work with my colleagues. But actually, if you would use lifting aids, you could do it alone. And so that would be more isolation. And so there's many reasons why they don't want to work with the lifting aids. You know what the only reason was why when they started to work with lifting aids? It was not when they said you have to do it or all sorts of things. It's when the labor inspection gave out fines, and they felt if we don't use the dysfunctional lifting aids, we will actually cause fines for our mother company, and we're the blue family. So okay, we'll work and use those stupid things just so the fines stop, and then we go back to how we used to work. So what does the story tell you? Human relations are super important. If there's distrust, it's often not so much on the level of your peers. There's a lot of distrust across the hierarchy. People don't trust the management, and the management doesn't trust workers. That's something that's quite often the case. If you ever get into positions of leadership, you'll see how easily that happens. If you move out from a group of peers into a leadership position, boom. Boom, the distrust is there. It's fascinating stuff. So it's really difficult. That's my long answer to relations, the impact of technology. I don't know if it makes any sense to you, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
And maybe to come back to the both questions that are posed, one thing that we've been questioning in our plan now at the mid-level is to see, can we stop only justifying in terms of excellence and the prestige of an institute or the name? Because very often you do see it that if TU Delft joins a partnership, right? If Erasmus MC does, if a professor does, you have your stickers. It seems like, oh, that's good. But at the same time, even especially when we have such a name, shouldn't we then explicitly also account for indeed that we still are trustable, that we still do what is promised? And we don't often do that as much as you think. Like the degree of justification to doing something strange and new versus doing something very classical that people have been doing for centuries. To have some discussions here, like aren't we defaulting too easily into that institute, that name, so then we're legit? Where probably actually by being legit you should be this active, proactive ambassador to step up and change things. And as for that, I'm also a member of the Young Academy at the moment, so we are nationally speaking about academic reform. And we've had a circle there that spoke about indeed societal impact and transdisciplinary research. And it's been also very interesting how systematically it seems everyone believes this is discouraged. And at the same time, hardly any PhD protocol officially forbids this from happening. Even so, many of these graduate school protocols or graduation protocols, they just say the promoters should deem the work defendable and then we're fine. So the whole idea that it should be recognized by these particular parties because otherwise it's not a paper and you don't have a future and you can't publish, it's something we made up, but it's not actually encoded at all. So we've also been trying to now spark this discussion, like aren't we too dogmatic in what chapters should be, how much production we want to see. If a PhD spends a full year starting a relationship with a community center, that's legit work that might have cost maybe a chapter compared to when you had the infrastructure, but it might even be more valuable in the long run. So we should just approve this and be proud of that. So there we've been speaking about this, like trying to point it out. We do work with the national PhD community too. I hope to make a magazine on it soon on societal impact and actually all the ways in which we are absolutely not forbidden to do this, much less so than what sometimes is being suggested. And even there, we've been kind of sneakily now also making a bit of a ring of people like, and we know that we have promotion rights and we care about these things. So if anyone needs to be in a defense committee later on to not cause issues with this, we know we can ask one another to look at this. But we also want to then be frank peer reviewers to one another. So these mechanisms we've been trying to use now also to maybe alleviate a bit of that issue that you rightfully mentioned. David, you seemed as if you wanted to react, or it's
No,
just
I was
putting.
listening.
No, okay.
I put
Well, on the
Yes, Hanneke,
if
yes.
anybody has a question, because I don't want to
Sure,
talk all the time, but I do believe, and what you mentioned, if you go up the hierarchy, when I became a professor, all of a sudden people stopped criticizing me.
Yes.
Which is awful, because I want dialogue and I want discussion and even debate. I don't care. But I can say anything, and I think that's really a bad thing. So over the years, been a professor for some time now, I hope that we can change that and look towards creating more cooperative communities where everybody has a voice and feels that they are safe to say whatever they think they can add. And so I think that's one of the things, also for you as a policymaker, to work on that.
Oh,
it's
totally.
changing the system.
No, we're trying to call it out. And indeed, the funny thing is, as an associate professor, I'm so often reminded of not being a professor. So then people ask, what are you doing? You're not a professor.
Wait until you become a professor.
And then I'm like, well, I work on content. I'm an expert. So
yeah.
And why do you ask me, and why don't you ask that professor who also is at the table? So that's how I saw that asymmetry. But
it's so recognizable.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of of an anecdote. At one point we started in our faculty to talk about diversity and inclusion to the management team, all professors. I thought, how do we talk about that? So I asked them, do you ever hear that people don't feel at home in your department? And they said, oh, no. Okay, then we don't have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because everybody knows, like, oh yeah, shit, you have to work hard to actually get non-positive or critical, or you have to work hard to organize feedback, and it's yeah.
I know, and even if you get there, it's very hard to get your colleagues in the MT to acknowledge and to see that it's not an incident.
Yeah.
Usually it's a pattern of behavior that we all have. And that's painful.
Yeah.
And,
So how do we organize this feedback? Yes, how do you organize this feedback now as professors, indeed? Yes.
Sometimes well, sometimes poorly. When I'm busy, I don't organize it, because it takes time and effort and curiosity. So the best way of organizing it is to make time to have conversations with people and to ask questions and be kind of really curious, and also ask questions right after something happened where you feel maybe, I don't know, I dominated the space, or I wasn't really paying attention. And so there's also a kind of training of inner awareness. So I spent lots of time doing leadership courses and, you know, getting really harsh feedback in situations where, you know, where it's a kind of safe place and where there's time for learning and processing. But I have to admit that sometimes I don't do it well. So the last 2 months, I'm just with my head up my working to get my proposal in. I don't check in with my PhDs. I just make sure I do the minimum time that they need to progress. Now, if that's your modus operandi always, then you get the busy professor. You know, the busy professors don't have time for you. Yeah, you have a problem? My door is always open.
yeah, that's not how it works.
So that's sometimes our culture, and it means when I act like that, I need to slow down and be curious about the people around me. That's my way of organizing it.
Well, and there's different levels that you can act. So as a person, as an individual, but also I've been the chair of the Dutch Network of Women Professors for 5 years. And during that time, we actually did research into social safety and factors that are influencing harassment in Dutch academia. And we simply wrote a report. We commissioned a report and then went to all the colleges van bestuur, all the leadership, the executive boards of universities in the Netherlands, and said, so what are we going to do about it? So I also like to put that action at a more systemic level, and I think right now things are moving, but still I've stepped down 2 years ago. Still every month, sometimes every week, I get people who call me and who ask for help. And now I know where I can guide them toward, but it's a big issue in Dutch academia. And taking responsibility and trying to stand out there, I think, is a responsibility for people who are quite safe, which is the leadership in universities, and that includes us.
Yeah.
So we just have to be bold. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your approaches. It also seems like you guys have a lot more awareness than our own professors that we've seen. But I'm a recently graduated master's student, and I did my thesis on a topic very similar to what we're discussing today. My topic was specifically about imposter phenomenon and how it is actually not, it's caused by social and contextual factors and not something that just magically erupts from within ourselves one day. We're made to feel inadequate and like we don't belong because of the people around us, because of the social relations we have, but also the context. And that's where a lot of the hierarchical problems come up. And I specifically did a case study with PhD candidates. So now as a master's student, so I did do some decolonial participatory design approaches. I also did ethnographic approach where I situated myself in their context to really understand what the PhDs are going through on a day-to-day basis. I built relations with them. I saw the way of working, and I understood. My findings emerged where we could see the barriers and the triggers that were on systemic levels, relational levels, and interpersonal levels as well. My question would be that, because I want to flip our narrative. Now you were talking about how you would approach someone. How can someone like me take this further and actually approach professors and promoters of the PhDs, those who are much higher in the hierarchical level, and actually communicate with them in a safe way for me, but safe way for the PhDs as well, to bring about these, because these tensions are invisible tensions, and it's also very, very delicate. So, yeah.
Hanneke, you can just speak.
Oh yeah, I can just speak. I forgot about that. Yeah, there's I think the most important thing is to realize, especially in a position where you are in and at a PhD level, that you're not alone. And I do believe that collective action would be the best way to go. Don't do that alone. I was involved in diversity policy in the Erasmus MC at the bachelor and master level, and we had a great idea. We did a project, and in that project, what we aim to do is we aim to basically make students from day one realize that it's important to be yourself when you become a doctor, because we need a diversity of doctors for the diversity of people that we serve in our population. And therefore, from day one, we had this embedded in throughout the bachelor. So at the end of the bachelor, like 2 cohorts came out, and they were like, okay, I'm me, and that's why I have added value. And then they went into the master phase, which is basically clinical rotations. And they ran into brick walls. Because they were put in society, in peripheral hospitals, but also in academic hospitals, where it's not okay to be yourself. Apparently, the culture is not there. And the only thing we could do at that point in time was, well, of course, blame ourselves for not thinking of the master phase to begin with, and of the systemic issues that these students would run into. But we made them team up. We made them at least we coupled them, and if possible, made bigger groups of students so that they could more easily be themselves in a context where that was not possible. And what I learned from that is, because when I was younger and a bit more naive, I would always knock on doors myself, but now I come with other people. Okay. So I think that was for me something where you can be comfortable because you have mass. And then you have a bigger voice. I think that's one of the ways.
So maybe indeed, let me be that other person then to go with you. Please send the thesis to me, and I think we should then go to the graduate school affairs office and to actually,
Where I wanted to head to next, because the issues that you brought about is something that I've dove into for my research. So these things have come up where it's not legally written that they need to publish papers, but that is an expectation, a very, very high expectation, which ends up making them feel like imposters in their own specializations. And I love that you brought out how they need to be themselves, because that is also a link that I found from doing some research, which is that what allows us to come out of that feeling of imposterism and even self-silencing behavior, which eventually causes us to build autoimmune diseases within ourselves. So it directly impacts our health and well-being. Is what allows us to come out of that is being ourselves and being able to express ourselves authentically. And because there's no space to do that because of all these expectations and hierarchies and everything, and also dialogue, connection, dialogue, and expression. So if there is room, I wanted to go to the doctoral education next. Because if we could have spaces like this to bring them together, it would already solve a lot more. Not solve, but at least address them. At least allow them the space, like, to reclaim.
Yes. No, totally. So let's discuss it, because I think if the diversity office backs you on that, again, it gets more institutional formality naturally. And I'll just copy in the executive board members as well. Yeah, we should. So let's do that.
Yes,
let's do that.
thank you.
Maybe I can add very shortly. So I agree, and I'm still naive in that I think there's real power in speaking your truth in a gentle way. Because in my opinion, there's few professors who are real bad people. They are there, but there's few who are really bad. But people are so.
They lack the imagination. Yeah.
Yes, and so it has happened to me, and that's maybe why I give it back. It's happened to me that a student said, "I have, this doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Or I need more of you."
Yeah.
And that, kind of got me out of like, what? Because I mean, I gave you feedback, and yeah, sure, I was busy, but then I compensated with this, and but just a gentle, like, this doesn't work for me, or something else. So it can be really powerful for people who are in principle,
I feel like you gave a good example of how to do that with your presentation, because I think you got a lot of very strong points out in a very simple, easy, and like, hey, this is not the best solution, but this is what is working. And I really liked that approach. I felt like that also gave an example of how to communicate by being honest.
Being straight and not resentful, but being straight what it does to you. It's a classic, but then you can never be against expressing your own feeling. It can never be untrue.
Yeah.
So on the official planning, I had until about now for this event, and we do still have a ball, so we can still mingle later. So indeed, if there are no burning questions right now, of course, we'll still be... There is another question. I do want to give you some space as well then. Yes, please.
I will, okay, I'll also...
Yes, please, yeah.
Follow the format. Yes. I actually have multiple questions.
There we go.
Of course. Thank you guys both for presenting. It's very interesting. So one thing that I was thinking about, you both kind of discussed the productivity culture. And I'm just wondering if there's been like any study you guys know about productivity long term. When you think about it, I think generally when we look at productivity, we think of short-term productivity. But really looking at productivity in 30, 40 years within that company. Because of course, like Amazon had a lot of turnover, which I'm assuming also reduces the productivity over a larger span of time. So I don't know if you have any insight in regards to that.
So yes, not many companies look at 5, 10 years.
Yeah.
Shareholders don't care.
Yeah.
They need it more quickly.
Yeah.
So that's one.
Yeah.
Number two, I would say that it's okay to have a turnover like that.
Yeah.
If you organize your work like that. So a century ago, that's how Ford made their cars. Any John or Mary can do this little micro task.
Yeah.
And that means if John or Mary drops out, then we get another John or whatever your name is. Mm-hmm. And it's a business model. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily mean that long-term productivity helps people understand, oh, wait, we need to do it differently. Yeah. I do agree. Yeah. It's not sustainable. Yeah. So it's not, but there's many things we do, unfortunately, in society that are not sustainable. So something else is needed to shift, I believe.
Actually, I do think that in the generative AI space, we see a little bit of this emerging because, of course, these large language models have been hailed as productivity boosters. Mm. And we've now seen the first slightly more longitudinal is a year than in our case, but studies where we actually see that productivity drops, or people actually have to refactor more code because they get it in quicker, but they don't think about the architecture later. Yeah. So some of that is coming out in this space now, that is deflating the hype a little bit, so maybe there could be some angles there.
And you guys both kind of discussed the importance of multidisciplinary approaches and from multiple disciplines, but I'm just thinking there's a lot of barriers to actually applying that in practice, as well as kind of thinking about the more systemic level from both education, but also and kind of how do you address those difficulties in your project?
Yeah, well, when I think of multidisciplinary, it's only step one.
Yeah.
It's what we're doing in the Erasmus MC, connecting, for example, the gynecologist with the cardiologist, which is, I think, a big step, because one only focuses on wombs and the other one only on the heart, not realizing that when a woman in a pregnancy has hypertension, her risks later on in life to get heart disease are quite high. And because they don't talk to each other, nothing happens. And so there's a lot of women who get big heart trouble later on in life because of them not communicating. But that's step one. I would like to go further than that, because this woman, these women, then end up not only feeling bad, having a bad quality of life because of their disease, and perhaps dying sooner, but also they're less productive. And they're less able to fulfill the social roles that they have. So I would also like to plead for interdisciplinarity. And that's even a bigger issue, because in the MC we're like, we're the king of the world, and and all the others, okay, they're inferior. So basically it's very much siloed, also interdisciplinary. We see economists, we can still deal with that. Social sciences, ooh, that's really woozy, you know? But we need to break down those barriers to really address these very complex issues that we see, and that they're all interconnected. For me, I'm an epidemiologist. The only thing I love to do is microsimulation and do some cool prognostic models, but actually what society is asking from me is something far more complex, so you do need to build that. And finally, I think in the end, and that's what you're talking about, transdisciplinarity and actually being on eye level with all stakeholders, that's the way to go. But it's not efficient.
Yeah.
And it's not effective in 1 year, and not in 5 years, but it will be in 10 years.
Yeah.
And that does mean that the value we put on what we do, being part of the bigger ecosystem, I think, as a researcher, is that it should not be about how many publications do I have this year. I know the medical center sets a target of 10 publications a year for me.
Wow.
Like, well, I don't care. I never complied with them anyway, because I'd rather explore. So feeling the freedom to do that, that's a big prerequisite. And the university system is trying to catch up with that through recognition and rewards, that thing. But that's still what I would call written on the wall, but not part of our culture yet.
Yeah.
And that's where the big challenges are. That's so important, in my view.
It's also interesting when you think about more the person-centered care, that you really reflect on how they experience healthcare throughout, and getting the social support, making sure the system can help them throughout the different stages of life. So it's a...
Yeah.
And you spoke a little bit about transdisciplinary, and that you felt like you had to take the role of kind of different, not take the role, but to kind of interpret the role and like, okay, do more ethnographic research yourself, although you're not necessarily comfortable with that. First of all, like what drew you to understand the importance of that? And secondly, how do you kind of deal with your lower level of expertise as compared to the people who do that professionally that you're working with?
I think I was drawn to it because I realized the inadequacy of my quantitative methods to understand work. And so I took it very seriously. I thought if I want to really understand more of something that's so far away from forces and positions and quantification, it's qualitative, so I got really intrigued, and so I said I need to take it seriously, so I married an anthropologist. Yeah, so that's my commitment. So I didn't go quite like that, but many fights with my wife finally opened my eyes a little bit. And how I deal with my own inadequacy in that field is I'm used to being, like you say, the king of my little tower. I've built a very small little tower, and I'm the absolute world expert in that little tower. And what happens in the next little tower which is not haptic human-robot interaction, but social human-robot interaction. I have no idea who's the king there. I don't go to their conferences. I don't know who's the queen of the other part. I don't know. I don't need to know. So that means if I want to understand how to link and liaison to other ways of knowing, I need to step down from my role of expert. And that hurts a bit at first, because it's kind of nice. I like, at least I like it, you know, that, yeah, I know exactly what's up, and I know everybody's in the field, and I know how to do that. But it's also a bit boring after a while. That's how it felt to me. And it's a bit empty. So it means it hurts a bit, and it's very rewarding. And that's how I personally manage it. And then finally, interesting concept of a good paper. There's a kind of an axis of, they call it epistemic stability. So how stable you are in your own way of knowing, your own discipline, and epistemic adaptability. So how open you are to other ways of knowing. And so if you're in the right corner, you know your field, and you're willing and curious to learn about other fields. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to know enough how to have a more meaningful conversation about methods, theories, approaches, than just chit-chat and saying, oh, you know your stuff, I know my stuff. And if you do your stuff, whatever that may be, I do my stuff, and then we don't need to go. So it's a one layer deeper, and that takes, like you say, it takes time, it's slow, it's ineffective. But it is, I feel it, I feel it, it is meaningful. Yeah.
It could also be translatable. What you know about robotic systems could help you apply to know about biological systems. Maybe a bit more difficult on humans.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes there's really interesting cross links. Yeah, and
and what was just mentioned, that was translation. I do think vocabulary also is really important in such contexts. Like, I had so many interdisciplinary works where we spoke about data and models, and then 2 years in we were like, wait, your data is not actually my data. Oh, okay, then I can't actually model the way you think I'm modeling. So some of that also, sometimes we have these almost false friend words that we all use in our own fields, but in slightly different ways. So being very explicit about it is really important.
I think it's a problem. I think it's my assumption, but that in research we use a lot of complex vocabulary to be precise, and that can be a little bit deterrent for collaboration, because suddenly you need to know all this complex vocabulary to be part of the conversation. So I think we also have to get better at maybe dumbing down how we say things, or not dumbing down, but creating a version, simplifying it, and so that we reach a wider audience when we collaborate.
sometimes we talk about it as an elevator. So elevator of depth and precision, and that you need to be able to go back and forth. So dumbing down also doesn't do justice. So you need sometimes the precision, but it's being able to kind of go back and do we connect here still? No, yeah, okay, then this is why we go, and this is, but it's complicated. Yeah.
So I was already bewaved that I am now definitely officially over time. And I do want to make sure that you have some time to join the snacks. Before that though, Studium Generale did want to ask your attention for another event that they are programming tomorrow at lunchtime. A rather serious topic, femicide, but a relevant topic today in the news. So if you want to hear more about that, please also join tomorrow here in the library as well at lunchtime. With that, I want to thank everyone again, the speakers, Hanneke, David, everyone who joined in the Q&A, but also you as attendees. Thanks a lot for being in this event, and let's have some bites and drinks still to close. Thanks a lot.